Zona versus its new conference, the Big 12. How will the Wildcats compete? How have they competed in recent years against their new conference? Let's bear down. And of course, Arizona's been an awful football program. Rich Rodriguez had a decent run. He went 43-35, so he was going to bowl games. And of course, they've been awful since then. Jedd Fisch is off to a good start. He's showing signs of life, and they're doing some good things at Arizona right now, coming off a 5-7 season. Their best history has been under the likes of Larry Smith and Dick Tomey back in the 80s and 90s. But since the year 2000, as we will see by the numbers, this has been a bad football program. We hope that they get better. How would they fare against the Big 12? Well, how have they fared against Big 12 opponents? Most recently, a loss in 2021 against BYU. That was a 10-3 BYU team, and the Arizona team was awful at 1-11. They only lost by one score in that game. They did defeat Texas Tech in 2019, a team that went 4-8, won by 2 scores against the Red Raiders. You see a bunch of games against BYU again, and against Houston in 2018, a couple losses against the Cougars and the Cougars, yes. Then we've got another date against Houston in 2017 and another loss against BYU in 2016. So Arizona not faring well against the Big 12 at this point. We go further back and we see a win against Oklahoma State, 59-38, against a pretty good Cowboys team that went 8-5 in 2012. Then there was a loss against Oklahoma State the previous season, and of course that Cowboys team almost went to the BCS championship game at 12-1. In 2010, it was an Alamo Bowl matchup against the Cowboys, and again, a good Oklahoma State team at 11-2, and they trounced Arizona 36-10. BYU matchup in the Vegas Bowl in 2008, and the Wildcats won it 31-21. They lost to BYU, a Cougars team that went 11-2 in 2007, 20-7, and then another matchup against BYU, a Cougars team that went 11-2 in 2006, but the Wildcats won this one 16-13. So that's 12 matchups against Big 12 teams, and 6 of those against BYU, and the Wildcats went 2-4 against the Cougars. 4-8 against Big 12 members since the year 2000, and actually all these games have been played since 2006. 1-1 in bowl games, 2-4 against ranked teams. If you look at the full 12 games and you go through the scoring differential, which I believe means a lot, not in one particular game, but over the course of several games, it starts to mean something, and Arizona outscored in these 12 games by 59 points. Now, these Arizona teams that matched up against the Big 12, they were not good. They went 63-85. The Big 12 teams that they were facing were really good, and basically that has to be taken into consideration, however, because those 6 BYU teams were not Big 12 teams. They were those independent teams for BYU, and also Houston, of course, now a member of the Big 12. Those are 2 matchups against Houston, in which Houston was a member of the American Conference. But still, those teams went 108-46, well over a 2-1 ratio of wins to losses. So Arizona's 4-8 record can be understood in light of playing better competition out of the Big 12. Now, again, Arizona football since the year 2000 has been one of the worst showings in the Power 5. Previous to that, good run during the 80s at times, and in the 90s under, again, Larry Smith and Dick Tomey, who had, at times, really good success. Of course, Desert Swarm in 1993, a Fiesta Bowl win against Miami, a matchup in a Holiday Bowl against Nebraska, and some really good teams in the late 90s for Arizona. But we're looking at since 2000, and it's been pretty dismal, although a trip to the Pac-12 championship game in 2014. This program is 38 games under 500. And that you got to include that they play out of conference a lot of SCS teams and a lot of Group of 5 teams, and there's still 38 games under 500 in the last 23 football season. 70-126, 56 games under 500 in the Pac-12. They've only finished in the top 25 one time, and they were trounced in the Pac-12 championship game that year of 2014, and they lost the Fiesta Bowl against Boise State, and that Wildcats team finished number 19 in the country. How does Arizona project to the Big 12? Well, if it's the Arizona that we've seen over the last 20 years, they would get trounced in the Big 12 just like they have the Pac-12 with a minus 56 win-loss differential in the Pac-12 since the year 2000. So they would get trounced in the Big 12 as well. Now, this is a very competitive, balanced Big 12. There are no elite programs to beat everyone else down like Clemson, Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama. but it's very competitive from top to bottom, and there are really no bottom feeders, at least as it stands right now. Iowa State could revert to that form, and Arizona could be a bottom feeder in the Big 12. Certainly, they have been in the Pac-12. It all depends. It's much like the Arizona State situation, although Arizona State has had much more success through the years than Arizona. So the Wildcats, bad football program for the most part. We did note the success, of course, pre-2000 under Larry Smith and Dick Tomey. Desert Swarm, beating Miami in the Fiesta Bowl. Good Holiday Bowl team that matched up against Nebraska. Some really good teams for Arizona in spots, but mostly a rough ride for Arizona football. So they would have to be committed and, of course, recruit the state, because the high school football play in the state of Arizona is increasing exponentially. It's getting better as people migrate to the state of Arizona. So the Wildcats against the Big 12 do not project well as it stands right now, but maybe Jedd Fisch has something going, and Arizona could certainly compete at its best in the Big 12. So in addition to those results of the Wildcats taking on the current Big 12, of course, they're bringing 3 schools with them, and they've got recent history against those teams, having played all those teams in the Pac-12 South Division every year. So a lot of results to go by. And Arizona, of course, has been one of the worst teams in the Pac-12 in recent years, thanks to one Rich Rodriguez, who brought the program down to a certain level. Kevin Sumlin really reached the bottom of the barrel, and Jedd Fisch doing a nice job to bring Arizona back. But again, what is it that we see from Zona against the 3 schools coming with them from the Pac-12? Against Colorado, as you might expect, the Wildcats own an 8-4 advantage since Colorado joined the Pac-12 in 2011, outscoring the Buffs by 24 points total. That's 2 points per game. Against rival Arizona State, well, the Wildcats have been better just in the last couple years. They won the last Territorial Cup in 2022, 38-35, but the Sun Devils, a better program in recent years, under the likes of Herm Edwards and Todd Graham, with an 8-4 advantage over the Wildcats, outscoring Zona by 133 points in those games. And as you might expect, Arizona against Utah with a losing record, although it surprises me to a certain extent that Zona has been this close. They actually won the early games against the Utes when Utah first joined the Pac-12, but now are 4-7 as all 4 of these schools now join the Big 12 together. Zona is 16-19 against the 3 teams coming with them, having been outscored by 175 points. This is going back to the 2011 season. Zona versus the Big 12. How will the Cats compete going forward? Well, we noted the many times that they've been a strong bowl team in the last few decades. However, that's been mired by many long stretches of losing poorly and badly. Well, Jedd Fisch made his mark last season by lifting the Wildcats to a 5-win season, a late season win, also against a good UCLA team in the Rose Bowl. Arizona's got much work to do, but the signs are hopeful. But now they go to a more competitive, deeper league with 16 teams. Just the sheer volume of the teams will make it difficult for Arizona to ascend near the top. Your comments below on Zona versus the Big 12 and the prospects of the Wildcats making their mark in their new conference. Right here at the Voice of College Football, best discussion, debate, and analysis. Lock it in.